Hello and welcome to the long-term reading project in which we will discuss a section of Thomas Mann's novel The Magic Mountain every week on this channel. And my name is David, and if you are just joining us now for the first time, I recommend going to this playlist on the channel and watching the previous videos about the novel to catch up with our travel group. In a nutshell, how does this project work? I will not give a detailed summary or synopsis of the respective section in the weekly videos, but I will just assume that everybody who is following the project has already read the respective section. And so what I will focus on is, I will give a very short summary, but then I will share with you my observations and thoughts that came to my mind while reading the novel or while doing some additional research in supporting literature or checking background material from various subjects that are touched on in the novel. Okay, so in the section that we read last week, Hans' planned departure draws closer, so his departure back from the Berghof to his bourgeois life in Hamburg. But there is a complication. He becomes aware of some health issues and he undergoes the usual medical measurements and examinations, and he finally receives a diagnosis or even a sort of verdict from the mouth of Dr. Behrens. So he is too ill. He also is ill. He suffers from tuberculosis, and so is too ill to return to his normal life. The best thing would be for him to prepare himself for a longer stay in the Berghof Sanitarium, not as a guest, but as a regular patient. So, and I have divided my thoughts on this section of the text into 5 parts, and I will go through them one by one. Number 1 is the next stage of initiation is reached. Number 2, an unconscious decision. Number 3, it's an upside down world, but the right one for Hans. Number 4, the divine verdict. And number 4, Mercury as the secret ruler. Okay, so let's start with number 1. The next stage of initiation is reached. I have some difficulty switching from Italian pronunciation to English pronunciation in the third video. Okay, we have already established in earlier parts of the novel that Hans' first experience have the character of an initiation. And however, this does not happen all at once, but in several stages. And the stages so far have been as follows. So Hans has embarked on a great journey into a previously unknown world with unknown and totally different rules. He takes part in the sanatorium's important rituals, so like the meals, the lectures, the resting time, and he also really submits to all the rules about the time that prevail here. And thirdly, also at the 7th day of his stay at the Berghof, the psychological and the economic preconditions for a potential prolonged stay were already checked and approved and achieved. He realizes after receiving his first invoice that he would be able to afford the stay, and he has this almost mystical appearance of his daydream that marks the beginning of his infatuation with Claudia Chachas by making him aware that he's almost identical, that she reminds him to his this previous love, Hippe, this homoerotic relationship he had, or it was not a relation, he had a sort of a homoerotic crush on this fellow pupil. So these were the important foundations that were already laid for his entry into the order of patience. And the next step now, and what we see in this section, is to create also the physical conditions, so the bodily conditions that can be interpreted as a necessity or a precondition for a longer stay at the Berghof. I deliberately chose this religious metaphor of admission to a religious order, the order of the patients, because I think that this section of chapter 4 is also really charged with that sort of religious symbolism. The first stage of admission into the order takes place under the supervision of a person who actually represents or embodies this monastic element, the superior Adriatica von Mühlendonk. And I think the parallels with the Christian religious world of monasteries are unmistakable. First, Adriatica von Mühlendonk, she not only has a name that sounds like the name of a medieval abbess, she also explicitly points out that one of her ancestors was actually such an abbess, I think in the 13th century. And the German original uses the title Oberin as her title, which is equivalent to the English word superior, I think, like in Mother Superior. So that invokes the monastic associations. And in the Christian monastic orders, at least in German, the word Oberin used here is actually also the common official titles for female heads of spiritual sisterhoods, such as nunneries. And there are also the title of abbess and prioress, but these are special subgroups of Oberin, so special designations for the heads of certain types of independent convents. But Oberin or superior or mother superior is the general or generic term. So we know also that Sister Superior, Mother Superior Mühlendonk, she is Fräulein Mühlendonk, so she is unmarried, most likely a virgin. So this is also in keeping with the vow of chastity in monastic sisterhoods. And the religious character is also emphasized once again visually by the description of the garnet cross that she bears. So garnets are usually red gemstones, and the symbolism of the color red is certainly important. It is sort of ambiguous here, because on the one hand, in particular in connection with the Christian cross, of course, it's the color of the death of Jesus and the blood of Jesus, but it's also a color for blood and death in general. And I think it's a fitting color for a lung sanatorium where many of the patients have blood, spitting blood sometimes, have blood in their expectorate. But of course, it's part of Thomas Mann's good style to break up this heavy symbolism by means of irony. The Mother Superior Mühlendonk's manner of speech and her behavior stand in a very stark contrast to her function and her outward appearance. So she has an almost tomboyish tone, I would say. She has a croaking voice. Her mouth is shaped like a frog's, and so she is not without a certain ridiculousness. And what she says is also sort of erratic, just like a frog that jumps and that you can't get hold of because of its slipperiness. It's just as difficult to get hold of Mother Superior Mühlendonk. You cannot grasp her, you cannot assess her fully. In my opinion, this unpredictability is nicely associated with her frog-like nature, the frog-like nature of her voice, of her mouth, and it's also this unpredictability gives her a certain aura of fear or awe. Her role in Hans' initiation process is to give him the key item, the thermometer. And if we understand this scene as part of an initiation rite, then the thermometer is more than just a practical medical item. It's an important magical object. It's a ritual object and an indispensable part of the mystery play surrounding Hans Castrup's admission to the order of the patients. And so yes, also on the more abstract level, I think we see this function. So like a magical object has the function to enable the admission, the initiation of someone into an order. So the result of the application of the thermometer, the result of the fever measurement, is responsible for the decisive next step, for taking Hans to the doctors, for the examination of Hans by the doctors, and finally his diagnosis. So they are almost divine judgment. In addition to this broad field of Christian religious symbolism, there's also a level of a pagan antique metaphor and symbolism here, because the thermometer is explicitly referred to as Mercurius. That means it's associated with the Roman god Mercury, and I will say a little more about this at the end, in the fifth point I'm going to touch at the end of the video. Let's now, for now, keep it like this regarding the mythology and move on to the second point, the unconscious decision. I think that Hans actually makes this decision to stay at the Berghof inwardly and unconsciously, even well before being diagnosed by the doctors. Everything that then takes place in the external world ultimately just serves to the external justification, to explain this decision to himself, to create a narrative that is convincing, also to explain it to the other patients and perhaps also to his relatives in Hamburg, and to be able to explain it as a sensible and indeed necessary step. I think we can see from many small indications that Hans is already unconsciously toying with the idea of a longer stay well before he got diagnosed. So it's, for example, the calculation of how much a stay in a sanatorium costs per year. This is only very superficially made for Joachim. In reality, it's clear, it's obvious that Hans is doing this calculation for himself. I think it's very clear by the fact that he includes invoice items that are only relevant for himself, such as the cigars. And we also learn some details about his own financial situation. So his income of about 18,000 Swiss francs. This is about 2.5 times the average household income at the time. So it's clear that this will enable him to live an idle life at the Berghof without any problems, just forever, just without working anything, but by the interest that he has from his heritage. So obviously, it would not be possible to live a life of luxury in a metropolis like Hamburg. This is also what his uncle, his godfather, Tinapel, has pointed out to him. If you want to stay in Hamburg and lead a life that fits your social status, you will have to work to earn money. But so at the Berghof, there are none of these social obligations. In this limited world of the sanatorium, it will be easy for Hans to live based on his interest, on this income, and he has already worked it out for himself well before the diagnosis. We also see that he is already beginning to postpone his departure. So I quote from the text then, on Tuesday or Wednesday, he would be off. So we already see procrastination at work here. And he is lying to himself about his motives. He thinks, is trying to convince himself that he grieves for Joachim. And I quote, his regret was at times so lively as to burn in his breast and cause him to doubt whether he would have the heart to leave Joachim alone. So I think this is this is all sort of self. He's lying to himself. So self-deception. So now he no longer wants to ignore his symptoms. The feeling of being hot, the palpitation, and the blood in his handkerchief. He has had them all before for about 2 weeks, and he didn't care. But now, as his departure draws closer, now he becomes aware of it, and now he becomes concerned. And now because he sees that he can use it as an argument, but so that he has not recovered sufficiently, and maybe it would be a wise step to stay at the Berghof longer. And so it's also noted in several parts that he wants to be led and taken care of, and he wants to be guided. We had already seen that in one of the previous sections. I think in the section right before that one. Now that he longed for guidance and leadership, for being influenced, and for paternal wisdom, paternal advice. I think this is also taken up again here by describing that his desire to be subordinate goes so far that he even is willing to believe absurd things. He is willing to believe in fake facts. He is downright ready to be brainwashed. I quote from the text, "With the easy adaptability of youth, which suits itself to any environment, Hans Castorp had begun to imitate this indifference. It might rain in bucketfuls, but the air was not supposed to be the more damp for that." So he is prepared to shut down his own critical thinking and to submit of the ideology of the Berghof, even where it is obviously wrong or absurd. So in addition to his infatuation with Claudia Chauchat and his urge to be influenced, be guided, also a third motive plays a role, namely that the stay at the Berghof provides him with an external justification to lead a life of lazy idleness, just as he pleases. We have learned early in the novel that he doesn't like hard work because it just distracts him from having his daydreams and from smoking. So now he reflects on the advantages of the sanatorium in detail. Now the idleness, the pleasant soft music in the background, the recliners, the reclining cure in these comfortable deck chairs. It's the most appealing situation of comfort, and he lets run all this through his mind, through his brain. And so I think this brings him to the unconscious or half-conscious conclusion that it would be better to stay at the Berghof. Of course, this freedom to be idle comes at a price. So you have to submit to the rules of the place. You are also limited, really in a geographical sense, to a very narrow radius. But I think to him it's worth it. I quote from the text, "All the favoring probabilities afforded by propinquity and the household regimen." The German original, it's a bit more clear about the narrowness of the situation, that he still thinks it's worth it. All that sounds attractive to him. He prefers the security of a narrow and highly regulated life. He prefers it opposed to any form of excitement. So I think he thus stands also as a symbol, a good representative of the bourgeois or the Philistines' fear of freedom, which can bring the unpredictable, the surprising, the frightening, maybe the upheaval, or even chaos. And I think that would be nothing for Hans Castorp, and that would be nothing for many people in this German society towards the end of in the area shortly before the First World War. And yeah, what a spoiled sissy is this Hans Castorp. The description of his symptoms is really hilarious. And again, I think this is something that the English translation is not fully able to deliver. The English text says the uvula in his throat was sore. And I'm afraid that the English translation here does not give the subtle undertone here. The way that this part of the sore throat is written in the original German. In German, it really makes you think of the way that a little child might be talking to the pediatrician. So it's really an almost really very childish way of phrasing this, that his throat was sore. And I think we have already seen this childish schoolboy airs in Hans a couple of times. For example, immediately after his daydream in the mountains, when he sneaked into the hall late, like an embarrassed schoolboy, and he tries to pretend that as if nothing had happened, as if he had been there all the time. And also he adapts this schoolboy attitude again now in the scene with Mother Superior Mühlendonk. It is explicitly mentioned again. I quote from the text: "The poor youth was still young. He had never got over his schoolboy shyness. He sat, so to speak, on his bench, did not know the answer, and took refuge in dumbness. End of quote. Okay, well, let's move on to the third point. It is an upside-down world, or even a perverted one, but obviously still just the right one for Hans. And what an upside-down or perverted world is this? So look, here we are up on the Berghof. Colds are ignored, and we are in a really rough climate, which is very, very likely to give you a cold. And here colds are ignored just because they don't fit with the ideology that prevails up here. So ideology becomes before facts. It's not totally new to us. And the focus on tuberculosis as the only disease to be taken seriously means that all the medical staff is walking around with blinkers or with a tunnel vision. And in the case of Fräulein Mühlendonck, this clouded vision is even beautifully expressed, I think, externally by the sty in her eye. But Hofrat Behrens, he is not better, as Joachim reports in an almost cynical way. No matter what the patient is suffering from, even if the patient is carrying literally his head under his arm, Behrens will tell you not to worry as long as it's not tuberculosis. So we can also see a couple of well-known mechanisms at work here. Ideology-driven totalitarian systems or systems where at least someone with an almost total power is in place. These systems tend to develop their own terminology and their own language rules and their own set of things that are ignored and are not to be mentioned. There's no such thing as a cold. So the most you can call it is a bronchial catarrh. I don't know how it is in English. The German word Katarrh der Luftwege. It's really a very strange way, a strange alternative way of expressing a cold in a way that is so technical, so high level, sophisticated language that the majority of the population will simply not understand what you're talking about. I don't know whether this works the same for the terminology used here, the bronchial or bronchial catarrh. So let's be clear. Now we are in a medical sanatorium for lung diseases, equipped with the latest medical technology of the time and with medical doctors who consider themselves to be leading-edge experts in the field of lung diseases. But obvious symptoms of an illness that should not be there, they are just ignored just because they do not fit with the ideology of the doctor. So if that isn't a topsy-turvy world, perverted world, I don't know. So, and the dichotomy of this world is, I think, beautifully illustrated in other places in this chapter 4 as well. So, for example, the thermometer, let's call it the magical object, because we are dealing with an initiation rite. This is represented, it's given to her, it's given to Hans by Fräulein Mühlendonck. And so we have already pointed out all this heavy religious connotation. It's an almost sacred act of giving this ritual item to Hans. But then it suddenly becomes quite mundane, a secular material. Suddenly she is not longer a quasi-religious sister superior, but she's just a market woman who always carries some goods to sell, and she's already bargaining with him and telling him all the objects of different price, and they would recommend this one and so on. I think let's stick with this acquisition of the thermometer, because I think it's also nice to see that also the acquisition and the first application, the first use of the thermometer are accompanied by already familiar themes and narrative devices or narrative tricks. Again, we have this another discourse on the nature of time, and we have this aestheticization of a banal object. So the thermometer is not described just as a medical instrument, a practical thing, but it's described like a luxury object. I thought just as like one would describe a very exclusive, precious fountain pen, for example. We can also see the reversal of ideas, this topsy-turvy, upside-down way of thinking in Hans' reaction to the slightly higher temperature. I think it's not at all fever, the temperature that he has. It's not just slightly elevated temperature. But anyway, he is downright delighted to have a bit of fever. And so we see that in the first session of this resting cure, after the temperature measurement, this really makes Hans smile. So I think he smiles because he experiences like something like the resolution of some cognitive dissonance. So at last, it is justified for him to take it so easy and to rest so extensively. He has been able to quiet this nagging in behind that he should be more active, should be his duty as a future engineer. Now he's at rest. He's at peace with it because he has fever. he is ill. So and he even wants more of it. He's downright disappointed that also with regard to his fever, he's just average or the mediocre. So, and he develops a zeal that is unusual for him. It's certainly a sort of the nerdiness of the newcomers who want to perform excellent in this new discipline of having fever. So he is coming closer to becoming part of the order of the patients. And I find the behavior of the other patients rather unusual and slightly irritating. I'll stick with the metaphor of the admission to a religious order. So as a novice, as a candidate for admission, Hans now becomes interesting for the other patients. Many of them, they probably have ignored him because, well, it's just a guest. He will be away soon. But now they see him as a potential new member of the order, but they are masking their interest with very different, individual, but altogether conspicuous or strange behavior, depending on the temperament. So some of them, they are teasing, some of them are slightly threatening, some of them pretend to be slightly amused or have a mockerish tone. It's very strange. And they all show different behavior, but none of them reacts in a way that I would consider normal and normal in the lowlands, for example. When someone reports to you the onset of symptoms of an illness that could be a harmless one, but could also be a serious one, you don't know. Trying to stick with this religious metaphor, I think Behrens also uses sort of partly religious language when he first meets Hans and Joachim in this section. He wishes them a sanctified metabolism. Again, a very strange connection of religious and scientific jargon that is so typical for him. He's always mixing up words from different areas, but I think it's significant that here also he's using words from a religious context in this scene that has this almost religious, process of an admission to an order. Okay, but now number 4, let's come to the central scene of this section, the divine judgment, or somewhat more prosaically, the examination, the medical examination and diagnosis. The first thing that strikes me is and thanks a lot to Gabi from the Italian Telegram group who pointed this out to me, is that the contrast between the two cousins, Hans and Joachim, is once again emphasized here. Interestingly, Joachim is seen through the eyes of Hans, who perceives his cousin as physical attractive, as an athletic, well-trained young man. He's even describing him as the pure Apollo of Belvedere. So the real an ideal of masculinity in ancient times and also at that time. But Hans, on the other hand, if we put together everything that we read so far about his outward appearance, he does not seem to embody any of the ideals of male beauty that were common at the time. And here too, when he takes his clothes off, then he stands, I quote, blonde, white-skinned and narrow-chested. Compared with the athletic Joachim, he looked distinctly the civilian type. In other words, there's no hint of strength, athleticism, physical fitness. He's just a weak and pampered young fellow. And now it turns out that not everything is going well with him on the inside either. And Behrens strikes exactly the right note that Hans is secretly longing for. We had already read in the previous section that Hans longs to be guided, to be led, that he longs for fatherly advice, and he gets that now. And I quote from the text what Behrens says. It's exactly that sort of fatherly advice. And now, listen, young man, to my words of wisdom. So Behrens' tone is exactly the patriarchal, condescending, benevolent tone of a surrogate father figure. What I like about the scene and about Behrens' language is that the narrator uses also Behrens' speech to pick up on the usual ironic play of opposites. Let me give you two examples. First one is how Behrens is talking about the contrasting effect of the air at the Berghof. So the first one is, the air is good against the disease, but also good for the disease. And then he also picks up this on this east-west contrast that we have seen in much detail in the previous section. Now when Behrens tries to talk up the Berghof to convince Joachim that it's not a bad thing to stay there longer, he says it's not a convict prison nor a Siberian mine. And again, I think at least in the English translation that I'm reading, there may be a weakness of the translation. Because in the German original, instead of the usual German word for convict prison, Behrens is using the French-Italian word bagno, which is very unusual in German. The 90% of the Germans will not understand it. You have to look up it. So it's really a foreign word in German. So it's very clear that this is a deliberate choice by Thomas Mann to use a word that comes from Italian and French. So this is associated with the Western Romanic culture, as opposed to Siberian mine that is representing the Far East. So it's clear that this is a deliberate play. It's not by chance that Thomas Mann uses this word bagno and making, again, this east-west contrast. I find the end of the chapter somewhat ominous, slightly unquieting, disturbing, when Krokowski welcomes the newly admitted adept with the handshake into the order. So this description of Krokowski's smile with the yellowish teeth, half veiled by the beard. This makes me think of a predator, greeting and seizing its next prey. It's a very ambivalent situation. On the one hand, this handshake is an initiation rite, or it's the conclusion of this initiation rite into the very special order. On the other hand, it can be seen as a capture, seizing an animal to be sacrificed. Okay. But let's stick with a more optimistic way of reading this scene. With this handshake, the next step of initiation has been completed. Hans has received a divine judgment or a medical verdict, a diagnosis, and now it is clear that he will not be returning to the lowlands anytime soon. Now he is no longer a guest, so his status, it's an initiation, it's a transformation of status. That's also happening in the religious world, which all these initiation rites are a transgression rite. So he's not longer a guest, he is now a patient, not anymore an outsider, but someone who belongs, someone who has a justification for living a life with certain privileges as an idler up there, but he is also now voluntarily submitted to the dictates, to the rules of this new religion, the new order, this new group that is dictated, dominated, ruled by the doctors. And now he must obey. Okay, number 5. Finally, a few thoughts on the ancient god Mercury, or in the Latinized form Mercurius. This term is introduced, as you all know, in this text as an alternative name for the thermometer, the eponymous item of this section, which is also the decisive tool or item for determining whether Hans is worthy of being accepted into the order of patients. First of all, I think to the English reader, it is obvious why the name Mercurius makes sense for the thermometer, because Mercury is also the usual English word for quicksilver, this liquid heavy metal that was contained in thermometers at that time. But Mercury is also the name of a Roman god. So we have the level of meaning of Roman mythology here. By the way, for the German readers, this connection is not that apparent, because the German word for Mercury is completely different. It's similar to the English quecksilver. So there's no connection with the god Mercury. And so by using this word Mercurius, this makes us really rise up our ears and keep attention, because the German reader immediately notices that there must be a special meaning to it. But let's get back to Mercury. Mercury also corresponds to the god Hermes in Greek mythology, with many overlaps in their attributes and their properties, let's say, or characteristics, some individual peculiarities, but I think a large overlap. So we have two levels of mythological significance, and on top of that, at latest since Alexander the Great, the god Hermes or Mercury has also been equated or amalgamated, another wordplay with Mercury, with the Egyptian god Thoth, so that we have at least three mythological levels of meaning here. And since Mercury is also the name of a planet of our solar system, there are also all the attributes and meanings attributed to the planet Mercury in astrology, or at least in popular astrology. So we have four mythological, sort of religious, mysterious levels of significance, of meaning. And this, of course, is a perfect playground for Thomas Mann, who loves to play these tricks of ambiguity, of multi-level significance with the various attributes and symbolic meanings of this world of gods, just represented by the single word Mercurius. And I will only briefly touch on this here, on a few aspects associated with this. And if you're interested in more detail, you will find plenty of material on the net, on the internet. I'm just going to highlight 7 points. It has to be 7. First, Mercury and Hermes are the patron gods of merchants. So they are also often depicted with the purse in one hand. So this connection between the religious and the merchant, I think this fits perfectly also with the scene in which the Mother Superior Mylendonk sells the thermometer Mercurius to Hans. So that's a nice match. And also Mercurius is also the god of thieves, and that is also of swindlers, of those who deceive others. So I think this also fits perfectly with the setting of the Magic Mountain, in which appearances are often very deceptive. Number 2, Mercury is also the messenger of gods, one of those messengers who guides the souls of the deceased ones into the realms of the dead. On a somewhat more abstract level, this is also what is happening here. That Mercurius, the thermometer, depending on what it shows, on the result, it leads the patient to the doctor, that is to the realm of Behrens and Krokowski, in the middle between the upper floors and the below ground floors, so at sort of intermediate stage, like Hades. And I would remind you that Behrens and Krokowski were also referred to by Settembrini as Radamanthys and Minos, the two judges of the dead at the entrance point to the underworld. So this is where Mercurius, or the thermometer, leads the patients to Radamanthys and Minos, or to Behrens and Krokowski. And third, this amalgamation of Mercury, Hermes, with the attributes of Egyptian god or deity Thoth, this also brings some interesting new attributes, because in Egyptian mythology, Thoth is first regarded as the inventor of timekeeping, of measuring time. So I think this is an extremely fitting deity for the novel Magic Mountain, where time plays such an important role. And Thoth is also the recorder, the minute keeper of the gods. He notes down everything that the divine judges say, the judgment of the souls of the deceased. He is writing this down. He is taking the minutes, and he then conveys the verdict to the souls of the deceased. And I think we see a nice reflection of these attributes of Mercury, Hermes, Thoth in this final scene of Dr. Krokowski, who is first, he's the recorder for Behrens, the note. He's the one then taking the notes for Behrens, taking note of everything that Behrens says during the medical examination. And then he symbolically delivers the verdict with his handshake. He's delivering and sealing the verdict with his handshake with Hans. So that making clear that Hans is now a patient of the Berghof. Fourth, an important attribute of Mercury or Hermes is an object. It's called the staff of Hermes. And there's also an English word which I could not pronounce rightly, caduceus or something like that. This is a staff with two wings or a rod, let's call it a rod, with two wings and two snakes. And on the one hand, this rod is supposed to symbolize that the fate of the world and of us human beings is shaped and determined by opposing forces. And again, very fitting for the ironic play of opposites with which Thomas Mann surprises us so often in the novel, again and again. And on the other hand, it is also a symbol that is often confused with another very similar symbol, with the rod of Asclepius, which is still today an internationally used symbol in the sector of medicine and healthcare, but which has only one snake. And so, but they are often confused. So here's another hint. Be careful, appearances are deceptive. And fifth, now there's another reference to astrology. Mercury is, in astrology, in the thinking of astrology, Mercury is considered the only androgynous planet. That is, it has both male and female characteristics, and it's therefore, once again, the representative of opposites par excellence. Number 6, in popular astrology, so in numerology, there's something for the number freaks among us. The planet Mercury is also considered the ruler of those years of the calendar that when you divide the number of the year by 7, it does not give a clear result, but there is a remainder of 3. So we are in the year 1907, and guess what? Dividing 1900 by 7 gives you as a result. Guess what? Yes, 2072, remainder 3. So for those believing in astrology, by the way, I don't count myself as one of those. I don't think a lot of it. But for those believing in astrology and in this numerical tricks of astrology, the year of Hans' arrival on the Magic Mountain is a year ruled by Mercury, with all the attributes that I've explained. And finally, number 7, it's a sort of a fun fact that I'm telling with a tongue-in-cheek approach, is another fun fact from the field of astrology. There is some specific branch of astrology that is called Melothesia. I haven't known it before. I just learned it when doing some research for this chapter. And in this branch of astrology, there exists a system of assigning the zodiac signs and the planets, each one to certain body regions that are maybe influenced by the zodiac sign or by the planet. And in this system, the parts of the body that are assigned to Mercury are primarily the tongue, and the buttocks. So, which funnily enough are precisely the areas of the body where mercury thermometers were used to measure temperature or fever. Okay, so by by making quite a descent from the celestial spheres into those regions of the body where the sun does not shine, we have now also played a beautiful game of contrast and opposites in this video. I hope that it was entertaining and interesting for you, and that it has provided you with some useful hints for a second reading of some parts of this section, or for researching some of the more nerdy, offbeat topics for yourself. So, and giving you some inspiration to go down some rabbit holes. If you've enjoyed this video, you might consider giving the video a like, a thumbs up. So this is just not for me. It just will help tremendously to ensure that YouTube, the algorithm, suggests this video also to other potentially interested parties. I'd love to read your comments or your questions on this video, and the next video will go online around October 6th, and it will cover the first section of chapter 5, the section with the strange title, Soup Everlasting. Until then, have a great reading time. Take care. Bye-bye and ciao.